when you look at a 6500 or 6800 in the wild, you're going to see something that's really interesting. You're going to see multiple supervisor engines. Let's look at something like that right now. Here we have 6807, and as it rotates around, we can see, there's a lot of ventilation there. But what's interesting is if we take a look at, and this is one of those beasts where it has the supervisors not at the top, but in this case, you can see it's slot 3 and slot 4. These are the supervisor engines put back to back, and you can see C6800, Sup 10 XL. Great. Well, that's our supervisor engine. Why are we spending the money to put in 2 of these? Well, the reality is this gives us some redundancy, but we want to augment that redundancy with an extra service on top to have stateful information cross between the 2 soups. Now we see this also in other chassis like firewall chassis. We see the same need. What we want is for information in the control plane to be shared between these devices. Thinking about like NAT sessions. What if you have PAT sessions or routing protocol neighborships? You want the standby supervisor, because there's an active and a standby. They're not both working at the same time. The standby should be aware of all of the nuances of what's going on with the primary, so that if the standby has to get promoted to primary, that it has the knowledge of what to do and take over very, very quickly. Now, there are a lot of older technologies that we might see if we're reading white papers. Things like RPR or RPR+. Now, we're talking, these are technologies that we would deal with in the early implementations of 6500s, not the implementations that we would do now. The implementations that we would execute now would involve a technology and protocol called stateful switchover, which relays the information between the 2 soups and synchronizes all the stateful information. So therefore, when you have a switchover, you can do so very, very quickly and not drop sessions. Think about like TCP sessions that are going through the chassis. We can maintain those. We can maintain that switch between active and standby. We can elevate the standby to active, to the primary, okay? So this is a very useful technology. Now there's something else. There's something else that we have, and it's nonstop forwarding. I'm going to talk to you about what nonstop forwarding is. I want you to think we've got 2 chassis here. And when we have chassis with these supervisor modules, we have a separate control plane and a data plane. That's classic Cisco Express forwarding, is the separation of the data plane where traffic goes through and the control plane which governs how the chassis forwards traffic. It is very possible that the control plane is going to fail on us at some time. And that doesn't necessarily mean we can't forward traffic. So let's say I take my control plane and cross it off. Let's say it's rebooting right now. There's convergence going on for the control plane, and that element, that module is being recycled. Well, these switches have distributed forwarding where the forwarding is all stored in the data plane. We have the fib, and that is doing the job for us of forwarding traffic. What nonstop forwarding does is it says, I am an adjacent device. Let's put an adjacent device here. And this adjacent device may not be like a 6500 with redundant soups, or it might be. It's not necessary. But we run nonstop forwarding between these, and what will happen is the adjacent switch will recognize that there's recycling of modules, perhaps, and it means I have to be patient. Just because I lose my routing protocol neighborships to that adjacent device doesn't mean I'm not going to forward traffic to that device. And so we'll continue to forward traffic. I guess I should have put that switch on the other side. We'll do that. We'll continue to forward traffic to this chassis, despite the fact that we know it's having some problems. It says, let's be patient with that chassis and let it recycle the control plane elements and the supervisor modules. So this is very powerful stuff. And it means that we're going to have fewer disruptions of our routing tables because we're not tearing down all the routes. And, you know, you might have seen things that hint at this before. Let's go over to DSW1. And I'll do a show IP protocols. And it says it's nonstop forwarding aware. Now, in this chassis, I don't have redundant supervisor modules, but I'm willing to give an adjacent chassis a break and continue to forward traffic when I recognize that the data plane is okay, but the control plane is not okay. And that is what nonstop forwarding is. Stateful switchover, that great technology, is there to improve these things. So we tie a lot of disparate elements together. Stateful switchover is to speed up the time of transition between multiple soups, and nonstop forwarding is about continuing to forward to an adjacent chassis that is struggling and given an opportunity to come back online.